Good morning. I think there's a few other chairs here if there's someone who would like to sit down. My name is Mark. I'm a friend of the Butt family, haven't known them for many, many years, and a great mate to Pete and Phil. We're all here to remember and celebrate the life of Pete Butt. And I think if you were standing here next to me, you'd be looking at this crowd thinking, what's all the fuss about? Amazing turnout, guys. Amazing for a wonderful guy. He was taken from us far too early, but he sure packed a hell of a lot into those 62 years. For each and every one of us here today, we all had a slightly different relationship with Pete. As a son, as a brother, as a dad, as a partner, a member of the extended family, a colleague, a school friend, or one of the beach crew. And I really say that, one of the beach crew, because Pete seemed to be at a lot of beaches, spending a lot of time. But I think to all of us, we knew that Pete was our mate. He was a mate. And as a mate, he was fiercely loyal and always had your back. He was a guy of real character. He was a good-looking rooster. I just remember that. He was fit, he was wiry, and he was a joy to watch as a mail rider, because he had a really distinctive wide gate stance and a cracking bottom hand turn. So you'd always know it was Pete out there because of the way the board was ridden. Like so many of us, I had the privilege of knowing Pete for a very long time. So I need to share a couple of moments from me for Pete. My first experience of Pete was in the mid-70s as Phil's little brother. And again, I remember Pete had the whitest teeth. And they were natural. This was in the days, there was no in-chair whitening, there was no gels and mouth guards. These were Pete's naturally white gleaming teeth. Now, I think it had something to do with the fact that Pete's granddad was actually a dentist. But I think it probably had more to do with the fact that Bronwyn and Jeff had a pretty strict regime in the dental care division when the kids were growing up. I think as protocol dictated, Phil and Pete had bunk beds in their room, and Pete had the bottom bunk, which I think is the right protocol. If you're the younger brother, you get the bottom bunk. I have these memories because I would stay over on a Friday night. Phil and I would go to the local Mona Vale dance. If you have grey hair, you might remember the old Mona Vale dances, where we participated in the process of underage drinking with great enthusiasm. And we'd come back to the Butt House late at night, and I'd have the spot on the floor next to Pete. Now, I do need to take a moment here because the following morning, on the Saturday morning, we'd get up and we would have the wonderful care and attention of Bronwyn. Bronwyn would get up early. She would make us breakfast. And I used to always be fascinated by this. Bronwyn used to heat the milk up for the Weet-Bix in winter. And I used to think, gee, these kids are really spoiled. You actually got the milk heated up. So Bronwyn would do that, make us breakfast, and then drive us to Mitchell's. Because Phil and I used to work the 10-hour shift at Mitchell's on the fuel wharf and the tender. So Bron would be really nice to us. We'd be sort of travelling in the car in a very fragile state. That's from the prior evening. So as the years rolled on, I watched Pete Butt transition from the trainee accountant at Boral, where they had a lot of fun. I don't know if they learnt too much, but I just remember King Arthur's Court and places like that. Pete had a lot of fun as a trainee accountant, but I'm not sure how much professional improvement was obtained through that period. But then he moved on to what he really affectionately referred to as the job in the police force. Pete absolutely loved being in the force, including engaging with what he used to call the hoodlums. I remember the way he said it. or he'd always be dealing with the hoodlums in Narrabeen. But I think he actually had great affection for them. Even though he was there to do a certain thing, he had great affection. There was nothing beige about Pete. He was a colourful character in the truest sense of the word, and he was truly one of a kind. But he had many layers, and I saw lots of those layers over the 20 years just gone, where we would spend Sunday mornings down the beach at Manly, or our annual weekend surfing weekends down at the south coast. So I saw most of those layers. It's funny, if someone did something wrong but apologised and fixed it, Pete would forgive him in a heartbeat. Not a problem. However, if they did something wrong, didn't fix it and gave him attitude, well, Pete would unleash on them in the way only Pete Butt could. And I'm sure we've all seen that. And it didn't matter whether it was someone not picking the dog poo up in the park, parking in a handicapped spot without legitimate reason to do so. That was a fire up for Pete. Dropping in on the surf, but probably the worst one, snaking. If you were out the surf and you were snaking to the break all the time and everyone else didn't get too much of the waves, Pete was not a happy camper about that, and he would let them know. As we know, Pete had pretty clear opinions on most subjects, and we knew it. He was a great one for telling stories and espousing his views on everything from the Australian political landscape to really obscure ones where he would bring up the fact that someone wrote a letter to the editor in the Manly Daily that just fired him up, that he was not happy about, that he didn't believe their opinion. So we knew where he was coming from and the fact that he had a view. I also need to say, although Pete wasn't a big bloke, he wasn't a huge sort of muscular fella, he was fearless. I remember it was 20 years ago, we had a camping trip down to Lake Conjola, Bromwell, where we'd go quite often with the family down there. There was a group of young guys being really obnoxious and noisy in the car park area just outside the camping. You remember it? Lots of families camping around there. Anyway, Pete, what he does is, without hesitation, he picks up his rather long mag light torch and think crowd control baton, strode off into the darkness to this group of young fellas, and 10 minutes later he comes back with a wry grin on his face. He said, all good, you just have to pick out the ringleader, you get onto them and the rest of them cave in. I think it was right. I think that's exactly what happened. But there was another side to Pete. He had a wonderfully soft heart and a kind soul. When something touched his heart, the tears would flow. Whether it was a movie or a story, Pete was a really soft, caring, gentle, thoughtful person. It was a lovely, lovely part to him. Now I've shared some of what I recall of this wonderful fella Pete over the years. So they're my experiences, and I'm sure every one of you in this room have got your own experiences of Pete and your own stories. But I'd like to start by asking Phil to come up, and I do need to say that Phil's his brother. So Pete and Phil were brothers, but they were mates. So they were more than just brothers, they were mates, and they were more than just mates, they were brothers. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Mark. It is so good to see everyone here today. I'm not going to apologise. This might take me a little while to get it out, but I'm going to get it out. Look, Pete was a remarkable guy. And for all who knew him, I'm sure you all, as Mark said, have a great story to tell about your time with him. Pete was just so unique, with so many aspects to his character. But Pete was a man of balance, someone who had a strong sense of justice, but with incredible humility and compassion. We were talking together a few weeks ago when we knew how the journey was going to end for him. And he said, typical Pete, he said, "I don't think a funeral's necessary." And he genuinely said, he said, "Oh, look, I really don't know whether many people will turn up." And then I said to him, I said, "Sorry, mate, you do not have any choice in this, because the funeral's not for you, it's all for us." And I think, looking at who's here today, I think that's pretty right. And how many stories there were. You know, I sat down over the last couple of weeks and were thinking about what I was going to say on this day, and then when he finally passed, you know, I started trying to recall the stories. I've edited the stories so often because I could stand here for the next 2 hours and tell you all about the stories that I knew about. So this is a bit of an edited version of where Pete came from. We were so lucky that Mum and Dad made the call to build a house at Bayview, just sort of through there, up on the, and to start our lives here. From Mona Vale Primary to Pittwater High, we lived the dream. We always felt sorry for the kids who lived at St Ives or on the North Shore, as they had to jump off the bus at the beach after a long trip down Mona Vale Road. In fact, Dad used to threaten us both that if there was any breach of the rules in the household, then he'd move the family to some crappy suburb like Mossman or Northbridge, so it was closer to him for work. And I can tell you that deterrent certainly worked for us all. And Pete's connection to the peninsula never ever wavered, and the lifelong friendships that he built through Mona Vale Beach, Pittwater High and Newport Rugby have survived to this day. You know, guys like, I'll call him Tall Boy, he'll hate that. He knows who he is. And Foggo, Barney, Parksy, Jeremy. They all grew up together and supported one another no matter what the consequences were. I didn't always believe the stories, but the one about the four-wheel drive on Mona Vale Beach was always a genuine legend to me. And as the story went, or this is how Pete told it, he and Jeremy were at Mona Vale pub one night, and I don't know how Jeremy got hold of a four-wheel drive, but he had a four-wheel drive, and they met a couple of girls in the pub. Hard to believe. And they decided that it was going to be a bit of fun if they got the girls in the back of the four-wheel drive, drove down to Mona Vale Beach, drove down the ramp onto the beach, attempted to drive the four-wheel drive across the length of the beach into the middle of the flags. I think, where's Jeremy? There he is. This is the Pete Budd version. Tried to drive the four-wheel drive along the beach. As you can imagine, it got bogged pretty quickly. And then they all decided, and this was at about 2 o'clock in the morning, they all decided that they should do the bolt. So they left the four-wheel drive in the middle of the flags on Mona Vale Beach. The only problem was Pete was on duty at Mona Vale Station that morning, and he had to be in there at 7 o'clock. So he turns up, he's on the front desk and he's fielding all these phone calls from local residents about the four-wheel drive stuck in the flags at Mona Vale Beach. I think he quietly called the local towie, and the tow truck driver came along and pulled the four-wheel drive off the beach. But Pete loved being a copper. This is where his sense of justice and what was right and wrong and his commitment to people in the community really came through. For those people who came across Pete doing his job, could never have asked for any better policeman to look after them. I lived in Melbourne for a few years, and when I came back to Sydney and Pete was still in the job, I'd always catch up with him and his partner Sergeant Graham Rutter for a beer at Mona Vale Pub. They like to refer to themselves as Starsky and Hutch. For those who are old enough to remember who that was. But I refer to them as Laurel and Hardy. And if you've ever met Graham, you'll know who was Laurel and who was Hardy. But Pete didn't sit back and just serve his time out. He trained in the Tactical Response Group, was a baton and firearms trainer, even though he admitted he was the worst shot you could ever run across. He was an accomplished investigator, along with building a successful drug unit on the Northern Beaches. And people don't forget, the first night that he was in Mona Vale Palliative Care, the nurse who was looking after him was an old Narrabeen local who remembered him from his police days. We all had a laugh since it ended up Pete had locked up a couple of his sons when they were young and stupid. And she thanked him for sorting them out and ultimately keeping them on the straight and narrow. The other great balance that he had in his life was Mona Vale Beach and surfing. As kids, we would ride to Mona Vale on our bikes, boards under our arms, surf, hang out, and hope that one day we'd grow up to be Mona Vale locals. Well, Pete certainly achieved that. It's wonderful to see the old bloke Mona Vale Beach contingent here today. I probably haven't met you all, but I hopefully will later. But guys like Gaz and Mick Silk and Kenny Horton and Murray Eccles and Chris, you need to know the pleasure that Pete had in catching up with you all at the beach. There were probably times, I have no doubt, you probably wished he'd just shut up. or maybe cut his story a bit short, or give everyone the abbreviated version. But you know, that just wasn't Pete. I know that when he wasn't able to get down to Mona Vale over recent weeks, he was shattered. You may also know, well, you may not have known, that Pete had a ranking system for all the long-term local guys at Mona Vale. To make the list was simple. You had to still be surfing, you had to live locally, and importantly, it was based on how many years you'd been there. Pete reckoned that he was ranked at either number 3 or 4. But remember, you gave up your position if you ever moved away from the area. So Kenny Horton, you got scratched. I'm not going to tell you though who ranked above you. But at the other end of Pete's localism was the ability to make everyone welcome who recently joined the Mona Vale community. It didn't matter who you were, where you'd come from, or whether you could surf or not, provided you listened to his stories you were in. One of the few regular trips he'd make south over the Narrabeen Bridge every Sunday morning was to Queenscliff. Rain, hail or shine, we'd meet at the table of knowledge. And this was a special time for us all. Sometimes we'd surf, sometimes we'd just talk, but we always do it with a coffee and a laugh. And that's what I'm going to miss the most. And I love surfing with Pete. Every time we paddled out together, it was like being with White Herb, heading out into the OK Corral. Pete enforced the rules of surfing with unmatched determination and purpose. He coached beginners gently on what was the right surf etiquette, but never give an inch to a disrespectful pro surfer. Just ask Nat Young about that. But Pete wasn't a master at everything though. He was never an enthusiastic overseas traveller. He really didn't like flying that much, but we were able to, on a few occasions, get him on a plane up to Indonesia or to the Maldives. But I'd always have to sit next to him on takeoff, get him to close his eyes, and tell him he was actually on the 190 bus to Palm Beach. And he loved his golf at Mona Vale, particularly because he could walk around without Dad. But unfortunately, golf was one of the few things that he was pretty bad at. And I'm sure many of you know that, as Mark said, Pete was a sensitive guy who always had trouble not tearing up in a sad movie. When we were young, I could never help myself but to tease him about that. So when Lassie died, or Mitch the otter was killed by a spade, by the farmer, remember that, Luke? Lisa and myself managed to torment him all the way home in the car. I'm so glad that Clint Eastwood always survived in the Dirty Harry movies. He would have gone into mourning for weeks if Clint had bitten the dust. But what really gave him the strength and the passion for life was his family. Nelson, Mackenzie, Paris, your dad was so proud of you all and what you've done in life so far. The people you've become and what you will all do going forward into the future. He knows you'll miss him, but he also knew that you'll all be good on the paths you're all taking. And he always complimented your mum Claire on how wonderful a mother she was. And Mum has always been the rock for Pete and Lisa and myself. And I know how much you appreciated all the time Pete gave you since Dad passed away. But you also know that they're both off fishing together now, and you'll see them soon. And for Zoe and Sam, my daughters, who unfortunately are somewhere in the rest of the world and can't be here today, I like to think that they learned from Pete, Lisa and myself on how important our brothers and our sisters are. Sharani, you just lit up his life and brought so much joy and happiness to him over the years you spent together. And you gave him so much love, comfort and hope in the last 3 weeks of his life through your beliefs and just being by his side. Almost over. But just a thank you to a few people. To the medical team at Northern Beaches Hospital who tried so hard to keep Pete safe, and particularly to Susie, who went above and beyond in looking out for Pete and the family. All the nurses and doctors at Mona Vale Palliative Care who treated Pete with such care and dignity. I can tell you that's where I plan on being in my last few days, because they were just tremendous. Mark, for having the strength to run this today for the family, thank you. Sharani's family, Carl, Kylie, Andrew and Fatima, for the tremendous support that you've given your mum. The Table of Knowledge, they know who they are. Christine, who supported myself and mum through this tough time. Pete, you'll be missed, but never forgotten. Thanks, everyone.
As you can see, a brother and a mate. Nelson, could you come forward and talk to us, please?
Freaking hell, there's a lot of you here. Sorry, I'm not nervous. It's just like, wow, you know. I think all you need to do to remember Pete is really just look around, you know, like all the people that loved him, friends, family, maybe even a few enemies from his police days that have come to make sure he's really dead. But Dad really was his own little community, you know. It felt like Dad knew everyone. Normally shopping with Mum would be long, but going shopping with Dad was a whole ordeal. He'd take us out to breakfast every Sunday and we'd drive to Pittwater Place. He'd bump into someone in the car park. We'd go to the newsagent to get him a newspaper and he knew the guy working there. We'd go to Coles to get some drinks and he'd bump into someone in the aisle. Go to the checkout, he knew the guy working at the checkout as well. Go get bacon egg rolls, yep, knew the guy working there too. Then he'd take us down Mona Vale Beach where Dad knew everyone. He knew everyone and he got along with everyone, even when he shouldn't. Like, I remember one time, he introduced me to someone at the beach, you know, shook hands, had a good chat, seemed friendly. Guy walked away and Dad turned to me and he went, "Did you see that bloke?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "Back when I was a copper, he was one of those narrow-beam skinheads I used to bash up and lock up back in the day." Oh, okay. But here that guy was, shaking Dad's hand, introducing his kid to him and thanking him. Now, I first met Dad nearly 23 years ago. We met at a hospital, actually. I was pretty young. I think I was about 30 seconds old. I was in my mid-30s. I was pretty fresh. I was a fresh baby. I didn't look the best. I think I still had all the gunk and the juice all over me. Mum was pretty out of it too. She had like a Nelson-shaped cut in her. But to be honest, I don't really remember that day. You know, I was trying to be cute writing this, trying to remember, you know, what my first memory of Dad was. And I'm not sure because Dad's been a constant throughout my entire life. He was always there, could always depend on him, you know. Mum and Dad had a rocky marriage, and while it might have been easy for a lot of fathers to see separation as a chance to maybe step away from responsibility, that wasn't who Dad was. Dad would have wanted us to stay with him all the time if he could. Him and Mum had an extremely cooperative friendship, which ensured that us three kids would grow up in the most stable environment possible. Dad was always around, he was always there, and he was always chatting. I think that's probably why us three kids grew up more on the quiet side. I think Dad did all the talking for us in a way. Dad loved to chat, even when he didn't really know what he was talking about. In the last few weeks of Dad's life, when he was in so much pain, he still loved to chat. And he didn't want to talk about himself. He didn't want to talk about what he was going through, you know, even sitting there in his bed with the whole world revolving around him. He wanted to know how everyone was going because he cared. Now, Pete could be a lot, We definitely clashed heads a bit. But none of that mattered because Pete always cared. It always came from a place of passion. We disagreed on a lot. Disagreed on lifestyle, on politics, how things should generally be done. But with Dad, it always came from what he thought was best. It never came from a place of malice or trying to be nasty. He stood up for what he believed in, for what he believed was right. He was stubborn. He couldn't be swayed or convinced, which, while definitely frustrating in its own ways, it's something I admire. In this day and age, I think it's a quality that many of us lack. A lot of us are quick to forfeit what is right and look away and ignore when something's wrong and go along with the consensus or the status quo just because it's easier or benefits us. Dad wasn't like that. It wouldn't matter if the whole room was against him or the whole world, because he cared. He cared about what was best for everyone, what was best for his family. I can only speak for myself, but I think I can confidently say the same for everyone here. But there was not a single time in my life where I asked Dad for help or asked him to lend a hand or asked for advice, and he didn't drop everything to come and help me. He never let me down in that way. In a way, he might have cared too much at times. He used to tell me, "Oh, mate, I was up all night worrying about you. I couldn't sleep. I was having nightmares." And do you know what he was worrying about? My taxes. Like, man, I'm 22 years old. My taxes, like, I log on, I get a refund. Like, that's it. It's not complicated. But Dad couldn't help but worry because he cared. Right up until the end, he just wanted to know that we were all going to be okay. That everyone would be okay. And I hope that finally at the end, he was able to stop worrying. I hope he was able to say to himself, "They'll be all right. I've done enough." And to say Dad did enough would be a hell of an understatement, because he did a lot throughout his life. He did accounting, which, yay. In case it wasn't obvious enough, he was a New South Wales police officer, worked all around Northern Beaches for many years. After that, he started his own company, High Caliber Investigations. Now, honestly, I couldn't tell you what High Caliber did, because I think Dad mainly used it as a tax loophole. But he did use it to run security patrols throughout Mona Vale, using it to protect the community that he had grown up in and served all his life. He mowed lawns, not for fun, for money. That was one of the jobs he did. He worked as a private investigator for most of his time after the police force. Whenever I told people my dad was a PI, they always thought it was the coolest thing. They'd ask, like, "Oh, does he track down missing people? Does he spy on people?" No. I guess they thought he'd be like Jack Nicholson in Chinatown, cracking cases. But from what I could tell, it was mostly interviewing people who couldn't speak English about car accidents. There were a few times, however, and I don't think Mum ever knew this, but he'd take us 3 kids with him on surveillance jobs and use us as cover. I guess he thought a dad with 3 kids was a lot less suspicious than a guy with a pair of binoculars. Dad actually taught surveillance at Granville TAFE for a bit. He wrote courses, he taught classes, he even took them out on drills in public, like little field trips. I don't know where Dad ever got the patience for any of that. But eventually, remote learning phased him out because he was a bit too much of a dinosaur to figure all that stuff out. Dad was even a soccer coach for quite a few years. Had never played a game of soccer in his life, has never watched soccer, but he coached my team for a few years. However, his long-lasting, prestigious coaching career was with Mackenzie's soccer teams. Now, Dad had a unique coaching style, mainly consisting of a lot of yelling, barracking, commanding, ordering and micromanaging. But while he was loud and sometimes aggressive, I'll be honest, I don't know how he never got punched at some of the games. He never put the kids down. He'd yell at you, but never to insult you or tear you down. He'd do it to encourage and light the spark in you. I watched from the sidelines for many years at all the young guys who'd run onto that field with an energy that only Pete was able to muster up. Either that or they were running in fear, but you got results either way. Now, I moved in with Dad end of last year. I think Phil described us as the odd couple, and I'll be honest, it could be a bit painful sometimes. I'm sure the ex-wife can vouch for that. There might even be a few neighbours here who can vouch for what Pete was like to live around. But despite that, despite hearing him yell at the cats, yell at the TV, yell at the computer, yell at his phone, just a lot of yelling, I'm glad I got to spend that time with him. However brief it was, just the two of us. I just wish that he hadn't spent so much of that time in pain. I think I'm going to miss all that yelling. He spent a lot of time watching old British crime shows. He loved all those classic shows from when he was younger, like Murder, She Wrote, Death in Paradise. He loved stuff like that. Dad was a Western fan his whole life. There's a good photo you might see later of him and Phil dressed up as cowboys when they were really young. He loved John Wayne, Clint Eastwood. He had a whole box set of John Wayne, True Grit, Red River, Horse Soldiers. I remember The Alamo was our favourite to watch together. Dad wasn't much of a gamer, but he loved his westerns, so he always loved watching me play Red Dead Redemption. Dad he definitely wasn't stoked that us three kids grew up playing video games. But the first video game I ever played was Doom on Dad's computer. So he really only had himself to blame for that one. He was a big Eastwood fan, Outlaw Jersey Wales, High Plains Drifter, Rawhide, and of course Dirty Harry, which might have been the movie that made Dad want to become a policeman. I can attribute a lot of my music taste to Dad. He loved all the great Aussie pub rock that he grew up with. I couldn't tell you how many times he'd tell us stories of how he saw AC/DC performing at the Newport Hall, where the band didn't even have a stage and were just on the same level as the audience, or seeing Cold Chisel and watching Jimmy Barnes down an entire bottle of vodka during a show. Every time we go to a pub, whether it was Mona Vale or Narrabeen, he would tell the same story to the bartender every time. That back in his day, the pubs didn't have glass cups because people got too rowdy during the music and would smash them on each other. Dad loved his music, but I don't think he ever knew the words. I think he'd mainly just mumble along to the radio and he'd catch the chorus on the second time through. Now, I couldn't talk about Dad without mentioning his true passion in life, surfing. Dad loved surfing more than anything. The beach was his home. He had salt water and sand flowing through his veins. His heartbeat was the breaking shores. His eyes were the ocean blue. And his mood was a lot like the tide, rising and falling, sometimes calm, sometimes wild. Dad was truly at peace and at home in the water. And not even in the water, but just being around the beach where he could hear the waves, feel the breeze, taste the salt. Dad couldn't live anywhere else. He spent his entire life on the northern beaches. And if there's any silver lining to any of this, it's that Dad died in Mona Vale, only a short walk away from his favourite place in the world, Mona Vale Beach. Well, I'm sure Dad would have rather gone out like Patrick Swayze in Point Break, doing what he loved, catching waves. There was truly no better place for him to pass, and no better place where he'll finally rest off the Mona Vale Point with his dad. There's a lot that can be said about Dad, and a lot that will be said. I know a lot of you here will have stories and memories about Pete that you'll share with each other today and will share forever. But I think it would be negligent and irresponsible for us to ignore the elephant in the room. Pete's dead. He was 62 years old and he's gone. And he shouldn't be. He should still be here, laughing, chatting and yelling. Dad died after a brief struggle with lung cancer. The reality is that Dad was a smoker his entire life. At one of the consultations with his cancer professor, he told him that he had his first joint at 13 and has been smoking cigars and cigarettes ever since. Now, Dad did try to stop. I started chewing Nicorettes. He still smoked. He tried to keep it a secret from us kids. He had cigarettes in the kitchen drawers hidden under the tea towels. And he'd go down to the garage to smoke when we were staying over, so we wouldn't see him. But we could smell it. You don't need me to tell you smoking's bad, because you all know that. You don't need me to tell you to stop, because you all know that too. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stand here and beg any of you to stop smoking. I just want you to look and think. Look around right now at your loved ones, your friends. I want you to think. Think about your home. Think about what you might do after the service today. Think about what you're going to do tomorrow. I want you to think about how quickly that can all disappear, because it can. I don't want you to stop for me. I don't want you to stop for Pete. I want you to stop for the people that love you, for the people you love. Because if you knew what the cost was, that the price you pay for that cigarette, that brief moment of relief that you might get, comes at the cost of months of pain, not being able to do the things you love, barely being able to move, to sleep, to eat, barely being able to see, not being able to work, not being able to stand. If you knew that was the price, not a single person in this room would touch a cigarette ever again. I brought props. This here is Dad's magnifying glass. He started using it because his eyesight became so bad because of the tumour in his eye. When he was still healthy enough to work, he'd hold it up to the computer screen so he was able to see what he was typing. He tried using it to read books until that became too difficult and tiresome, and he gave up out of frustration. Dad loved reading, and he couldn't even do that. Whenever any of us or any of you went to visit him in palliative care, Dad couldn't tell who you were by sight. You had to introduce yourself because he couldn't see who you were. That's what the cost is. And I'm sorry if this might make you upset. I'm sorry if hearing me talk about Dad's pain might make you uncomfortable, but I can guarantee you it's not as uncomfortable as he was, and not uncomfortable as I am right now. Speaking with Dad beside me, with you all in front of me, praying we don't have another one of these funerals again too soon. Whether you're a young person who might have a vape on a night out, or an older person who's smoked your entire life and doesn't see the point in stopping, I implore you to look after yourself. Do the things you want. Do what makes you feel good. Do what makes you happy. But do it in a way so that you can do it for a long time. I remember one time driving home from the hospital after a treatment, Dad said to me that he was going to change. He said that this was a wake-up call for him. He was going to change his lifestyle, become healthier. Dad never had the chance to change, but we all do, and not just for smoking, but to be healthy, to look after ourselves and each other. Dad would have loved to have seen so many people coming out for him today, and I know this isn't even everyone. I haven't been to many funerals, thank God, but I think it's important to celebrate the great years and memories that we have with Pete. Now, personally, I hate the idea of talking about legacy, trying to make someone's life worth living and their death worth dying. But I truly believe that we're surrounded by Dad's legacy right now, which is each other. Like I said at the start, Dad was his own little community. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being a part of Dad's life. And thank you, Phil, for the open bar later. Thank you.
I've been around a long time, and I have to say, it's a thing that runs in the Butt family, and it starts with Jeff, and it's through two brothers, and now I've just seen another generation of an incredible ability to communicate. Thank you, Nelson. Mackenzie, we ask you to step forward and say a few words. Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out here. It's a real testament to who Dad was that there's so many people here. I've written my speech a bit differently. It's more like an open letter that I've written to Dad. The day Dad passed, I was in the car when he passed. A couple hours later, I was in the car to Goblin Police Academy. So I've only come back yesterday. I was there the whole week. It was my last week, so it's much shorter than Nelson's speech. I only had a day to write it, so yeah, I'll start it. Hey Dad, I'm sitting here writing this in Mum's car on the way home from the academy. Throwing my hat in the air was pretty fun. The weather was pretty... Sorry, I got a swear word here, but Mum told me not to swear. It's pretty shit, to be completely honest. I reckon it only rained about 4 times during my 4-month stay in Goulburn, so of course graduation had to be one of them. I remember another one of those rainy days is when you dropped me off for my first proper week down at the academy. It was proper cold that night. I met so many great people down at the academy. I love telling you all about them. We've been through a lot as a group, so I wouldn't be lying when I say I'll miss them more than some friends from high school. The highlight of my weekends off was meeting with you and going to Warriewood Square to get lunch. It was funny getting to complain about all the normal people back at home milling around without a care for anything around them. He laughed as he realised I was starting to think and act like a cop. Someone who complains about people, I guess. I'm pretty sure the fact that both you and Mum were police officers impacted my decision to follow in your footsteps. I just know it's what I've always wanted to do ever since I was probably 5. Your war stories were always fun to listen to, even though you've already told me all of them at least 3 times. I'm pretty sure each one of them involved you bashing someone up. I've always admired your ability to talk to absolutely anyone, whether it be a random person at a coffee shop or someone down at the beachfront for an hour while us 3 kids had to wait for you begrudgingly. Dad, I wouldn't be able to make it to where I am today if I didn't have you to teach me how to be a man. You were firm in raising us so that I would have the respect and maturity to live as a young man. I know now what parts of you I do and don't want to be like. Can't see, goddamn. I admire your character, but you yelling at Phoenix, our pet cat, was something I couldn't respect about you. Poor Phoenix. Your selflessness for your children, Shirani, and the rest of the family is something to be respected. You truly did put others before yourself. And for that, the number one teaching I learned from you is that family is everything. Anyways, I'm now writing this letter on Saturday morning, 1 hour before I have to leave. I should probably start getting ready. I'm glad to say I'm thankful to be your son. So as I always used to say, love you, Dad. Catch you later.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I'm sure you do understand how proud he is. You know, now there's another Constable Butt. I think people are going to be doing a double take when they see that number. Going true. Paris, would you like to come forward?
Oh, bear with me. I think I was pretty lucky, because to me, Pete wasn't Pete, he was Dad. And I don't think there's any amount of words that I could say to really capture who he was as a person. Dad's nickname for me was Little One, which started off cute, but the effect had worn off by the time I turned 17, and I was no longer a fan. And it didn't really help that he also called the cat by the same nickname. He would also call me Parry, sometimes Little Parry, because apparently he was allergic to calling anyone by their actual name. Anyone who knew Dad, or even anyone who had a single conversation with him, knew one thing for sure. He could talk. For hours and hours and hours, if he was given the chance, he loved talking. It didn't matter who, what, or where. When he got the chance, he suddenly became an expert of any and every topic. Honestly, his ability to talk was pretty impressive. If he were anyone else, I would say I had no idea where he found the energy, but the amount of coffee he drank definitely had something to do with it. Always large cap, one sugar. And he really did talk all the way up to his last day. Sorry. He loved making a point. Usually his arguments were backed up with made-up statistics or imaginary studies, but we let it slide. Every morning, Dad would drive me to school. Even though every time it was the same, and I was more than capable of catching the bus, he always offered, and he always made sure to tell me how much he enjoyed it. We would talk about our days, call Grandma, and if I was lucky or unlucky, he would sing along to the radio. And every day, without fail, I'd hear what he called his daily political ramble, where I got all the pleasures of hearing all his hot takes. And one thing's for certain, he was definitely not afraid to share his opinion. I'm going to miss those school mornings, as well as the way he'd rant, his coffee order, how he'd yell when the footy was on, or when the cow would ask for food, his annoyingly constant chewing of Nicorettes, how he'd mispronounce words without realising or completely make them up, how he couldn't read the room when he said something offensive, or when he'd fall asleep watching reruns of British crime shows, the taste of his cooking, how he had no idea how to use a phone, how he ripped his pie bags, and how he was the only person I knew who still actually read the newspaper. I'll miss how he was incredibly generous, his unique ability to make friends, and how passionately he lived. I miss you, Dad. Love, Little One.
You sort of hope that Pete can hear all this, don't you? Every little bit of it. He must be so incredibly proud of you three. Authentic, confident, genuine. What a wonderful life's work. Congratulations, guys. Now, the next person I'd like to ask to come up was a constant companion to Pete on the travel to and from Manly Beach on a Sunday morning. He doesn't know it, but we used to refer to him as the handler. And on occasion, I think he sort of knew that himself. So can I ask Kyle Hill to come up, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you to everyone that's here. As Mark said, my name's Kyle. I'm not going to be able to throw too much new news to you today. I didn't call Pete. I called him Peter. So let's go. Today we are, as has been said already, here to celebrate the life of Peter Barton. I'm extremely honoured to stand here today representing Peter's friends. I say honoured, as I recognise some of you present have known and been a friend or colleague for more than my estimated 35 years of friendship with Peter. Who was Peter? He was a son to wonderful parents, Bronwyn and Jeff. He was a cherished brother to Lisa and Phil. He was a father to Nelson, Mackenzie and Paris. He had been a loyal husband to Claire. He idolised Sharon in recent years. Peter was an accomplished surfer. Peter was a good fisherman. Peter was a man with ethical conviction. Peter was also our friend and colleague. You can't say you knew Peter well if you had not been on the receiving end of multiple sought or unsought opinions on literally any topic. He planned with great research, in some cases, a topic to be discussed wherever he might have been headed. Some of my fondest memories are being addressed on the way to, at, and often on the way home from the institution known as the Table of Knowledge at the Queenscliff beachfront that meets every Sunday morning. A similar institution exists at Monavale Beach. Neither will be the same without his presence. Peter was without challenge a giver, whether it be offering advice relative to how to run the country to a past Prime Minister in the surf, a past State Member of Parliament at the soccer, where he coached Nelson's and Mackenzie's team when nobody else would offer their expertise. Peter loved women, not by any means in a playboy fashion, but by offering them free how to surf lessons that were really more about how to deal with my gender's often inappropriate behaviour towards them with respect to sharing waves. Peter was a connoisseur in the true sense of its definition, an expert judge in matters of taste, especially with respect to Nicorettes. There is probably not a flavour he had not tried. His staple foodstuff was coffee. I doubt his appreciation for coffee could meet anyone's definition of connoisseur. I personally am looking forward to sharing past stories, some that I may have forgotten, as well as new stories from you, his cherished friends and colleagues. Peter may have been only 62 years old when he told me he was going surfing on the other side of the rainbow. Rest in peace, our friend.
Thanks, Carl. Could I ask Carl to come up, who's going to read a letter from Shirani to Pete? Thank you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Carl. I'm the son of Shirani, who was and is the partner of Pete. This is a speech from her words, so I'll just read it out to you. My dear Pete, it's sad to see our beautiful journey together was cut short unexpectedly. You always put yourself last and looked after your friends and family first. I got to speak to a nurse at Monavale Hospital, and she said that they have had so many patients over the years, but of none have had more visitors than you. This shows how much of an impact you have had on people and how loved you are. You had a good sense of humour, and you would always remind me that you never had to worry about being with a bald-headed man because you had such a lovely full head of hair. It was hard to watch what you were going through over the last few months, but I was praying for a miracle to happen. You showed all of us how to accept one of the most difficult circumstances in life with positivity and a smile. I'm very proud of you. We can no longer hold hands anymore, and I will miss you so much. I want you to know that you will always be in my heart. As you know, I'm a Buddhist and believe in reincarnation. So I hope we will meet in our next life to continue our journey together. I felt loved and protected when I was with you. Thank you so much for looking after me. I will see you soon. Love you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Shirani. We now have a collage of memories for Pete to come through together with the song. So that'll just come through now.
Takes more than just a memory to make me cry. And I'm happy just to sit at a table with old friends and see which one of us can tell the biggest lies. And there's a girl, she's falling in love, near where the piano stands. Young local factory out of work, just holding hands. And I'm wondering if he'll go, if he'll sad. Do you remember nothing stopped us all the feeling in our head? Oh, the green trees around the weary driver. Nothing else can set fire to this town. There's no trees, there's no place, everything within this place just makes it harder to believe she won't be around. Oh, the green trees around the weary driver. Nothing else can set fire to this town. There's no trees, there's no place, everything within this place just makes it harder to believe she won't be around.
We lost a good one in Pete today. And although it's incredibly raw, time's a healer. So soon enough, we'll remember Pete with a smile. And we'll see that familiar Pete grin smiling back at us. As we conclude this service, we've all come today together to reflect on Pete's life and how he touched all of us in that journey. The family would invite us all to come downstairs for the wake, to take some time to talk to each other and to share those stories. But there's also a large book downstairs, a book, and we would ask you to put a few comments in there. Relay your story to Pete. How you knew Pete. Because those relationships and those recollections are going to be cherished by Pete's family for years. So please see them for what they are and provide something in that area. I know Pete would be disappointed if we didn't do that. And I think, we've listened to a few things today. We all know better than to disappoint people. It's now time for Paris, Mackenzie, Nelson, Lisa. The family are now going to take Pete out to the chariot that awaits him. Please join us as we say farewell to Pete as he heads off, and as Phil said, to go fishing with Jeff in that secret spot that they would never tell anyone about.
touch the heart of everyone. Did guys good in yes? Because he was going to do the catch up. And we had like 3 years ago. Well, that's not 3 years ago. And no one can find it.